Great. Hey, thanks for sticking with me. So, what do you think of when you think of the media, right? This is the thing that we hear about in the media, right? People will be like, the media says this. Full disclosure, I went to journalism school, and so I'm pretty soft on the media. Although, kind of like an in-family fight, sometimes I'm like, I defend them, but also wish that they would do better. So let's talk about it. So usually when we're talking about the media in a traditional sense, we're thinking about television, film, radio, advertising, and the news. There's also what they call new media, which is kind of like a term from the 90s. So how new really is it? But it's things like podcasting and blogging and any kind of thing that isn't necessarily run through a gatekeeper in the same way that you have to go through filters to be able to get on TV, but anybody can make a podcast. So that's what we got in mind. So who is the mass media made for? Well, it's made for the masses by the media, all right? Media, by the way, is the plural of medium, just FYI. And so how does it affect you? In a number of ways, which we'll talk about. The first one of which is just that, like, you should know that you are inundated with information. The average person gets hit with 34 gigabytes of information a day, which is a 350% increase since when I was born in 1980. And that's 3.6 zettabytes each year. And I don't know why I know this, but that is the full amount of all the hard drives in Minnesota. Who knew, right? So that's a ton of information to take in and sort of process. Even when it's going on in the background, you think about leaving the TV on at home, like those things still get to you. Like they get processed in your brain somewhere because you hear them. And we're not designed for that. Like we're like evolutionarily speaking, like we're not supposed to be this stimulated. Like there's something wrong with us. But so this pie graph over here, just FYI, I think it's from like 2014. So it maybe has changed a little bit, but it looks like 44% of all communication comes from TV, the next big one being a computer. I would be willing to bet that phone has jumped quite a bit. Radio's probably declined. Print's probably declined. And then computer games, right? That's weird. So yeah, so just know that you're being hit with a lot of stuff. Now, who's hitting you with this stuff? What we call the culture industries, right? And these are organizations that are in the business of mass communication. And here's what they do, okay? So the news, is probably the one that people think about the most, right? And in news, we think about what we call agenda setting theory. And that is that, in theory, the news doesn't tell you what to think, but it does tell you what to think about. And so what I mean by that is, like CNN may run a story on, Syria, and they may not come out and say, you should support this war in Syria, or you should support the Moab, whatever. But they, because of their focusing their attention on it, they're saying effectively, implicitly, you should think about this. This is important, right? And so part of the big argument with this type of communication is like, who gets to decide like what we look at and think about, and so that's a thing to consider, right? And so and people do this sometimes. They're like, why is nobody covering this story? Like, this is important. We've never heard about this, but it's because somebody in the news industry said, or usually like the news industry isn't a thing. Like it's hundreds and thousands of different news outlets. But somebody's effectively across the board at some level said, this isn't a thing that we need to think about, and therefore we don't put it on TV, or the radio, or the whatever. So anyways, that's kind of interesting. In movies, we think about it as in terms of enforcing cultural norms, right? So think back to when we talked about maintenance, in the employee of the month kind of thing. Movies sort of do the same things. Like sometimes they challenge us. By and large, they are like reinforcing stuff, right? So, like like in all the westerns of the 60s and 70s, like men should be tall, dark, and handsome and kill people and ride away as quickly as possible, right? And so we internalize that and we're like, oh, this is normal, right? And so one of the things that I've noticed recently is that there's been this sort of big push for heroines, and not heroin with needles, but like heroines with an E at the end. So like female lead characters, that there was just, not enough of that. And there's sort of a big push, and so you end up with things like the Hunger Games and the Divergent series and the Fifth Wave and There's just so many like girl power movies out there now, which is kind of interesting to me. I've been to so many of them, and I'm like, what happened to like dudes like kicking butt? And so, but anyway, I digress. But so that's the thing, right? So that's saying we're like making a collective effort to say this is normal now. You shouldn't like expect all the action heroes to be male, or even Star Wars, right? Like remember the scene when like Rey's like. The guy's like trying to hold her hand and lead her to safety, and she's like, "You're slowing me down, fatso," like that guy. So these are like very subtle things that they do that you just need to know, or like you're internalizing on some level. Anyway, so television though tends to push cultural bounds, where movies tend to reinforce them. Television seems to push them because television is low investment, right? Because you can create a TV show real quick. Or not real quick, at a real lower, like a much less of a cost than at a movie, with less investment. And so television is the place where we, see the first like openly gay characters, or, like where we deal with like racial issues and so like those kinds of things, that tends to be their job. And then internet outlets, when you think about like blogs and, even like smaller news sites tend to be niches, right? Niches, or however you say it. If you're fancy, it's niches, where people, like go to get like, I want to learn about fishing in the Ozarks. I'm going to go to like that website. So anyway, cool. So the last sort of bit here is, are media serving an important role in society? And the answer simply is yes, right? It's just like, whoa, like we don't, maybe you've thought about this. I don't know. Like I didn't until I got to school. But it does a couple things, right? It confirms social identities. So like gender or regionality, like what does it mean to be part of the Midwest? What does it mean to be an East Coaster? Like all these things are reinforced on TV and the movies. It helps us sort of place our understanding of the world, like, based on the news and movies and TV, like that is probably the biggest, determiner of what you think about whether we should be in Iraq or Iran, or how we should relate to North Korea, or, crime. Jesus, like crime, we're at the lowest point of crime in America's history, right? Like, or at least recent history, modern history. And yet people think that, like there's just huge crime waves like across the world, it's weird. So anyways, if you're not going out and seeking out like hard data, like most of the bit, like people absorb stuff from the media and that becomes their reality, and that's a big deal. Chicago sucks. Like its crime has gone up dramatically. Most places, not so much. So, and then also like interpreting media events, right? So, North Korea launched a nuclear test and it failed. What does that mean? Like, we don't know what it means. Like, you probably wouldn't turn to like Bob that you have lunch with in the diner and be like, what does that mean? Like, you would probably go to the television and look for the news to tell you what's the meaning of all that. So anyway, so these are just like big picture things. So just to review, like organizations don't necessarily need communication, although they do, but more importantly they are communication, and that in society they play a really big important role in terms of telling you what to think about, in terms of enforcing like maintenance patterns of like how we should react to one another and what roles we should play. And then finally, just like, defining what our world is and whether it's scary or whether, it's more safe, or whether, we're meaning making this machines as humans. I'm kind of digressing now and I apologize for that. But the thing, like humans have an innate desire to find meaning in stuff. We look for patterns. And it's a thing that helps us survive, but also sometimes we try to find patterns when they're not there, and sometimes that happens and it plays out in the media, right? We go and we look and they say, what does this mean? And of course they want to be able to give an answer, and so they're like, it means this, and they may be wrong, they may be right, I don't know. But anyway, that was kind of a weird summary and a weird way to end the semester's lessons, but I'm just gonna end it there. So there you have it. Make something of that. Find your own meaning. Anyway, all right, great. Hey, thanks for listening.